Hi everyone, it's Marissa and James from Rise High. Today we're talking about going to auction. You might have found your dream home and it might be getting sold by auction. So there's a lot that you need to know and we're going to cover everything for you in this video today. We're going to talk about what you need to do in the lead up to an auction, before the auction. We're going to talk about what you need to do during the bidding process. We're going to talk about what to do if you're successful on the day. We're also going to cover some of the risks and how you can protect yourself against those risks. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So James, what do people need to do and know in the lead up of an auction?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. You want to be prepared before you go to auction. So the first thing that we always talk to our clients about is making sure that you've got your finance ready.
Yes.
So in an ideal scenario, when you go to auction, you've already got pre-approval.
Yeah, that's super important because when you bid at a property when you bid at auction for a property,
Yep.
It's actually an unconditional contract, isn't it?
That's right. Yep.
If you can't get your finance at that point, you are putting yourself in a bit of a pickle.
That's right. So yeah, if you do, you really want to have that pre-approval so that you know that within that price range that you're pre-approved for, that you can confidently go to the auction, you can confidently bid, knowing that you're pre-approved from a finance perspective, so you're actually going to be able to get the finance when you need it.
Yeah.
So that's really important. So talking to your broker, getting that organised in the lead up to the auction is really, really important.
Would you say also understanding your borrowing capacity? So for example, you might have got a pre-approval locked in,
Yep.
and that might be your absolute maximum that you can borrow, or there may be some wiggle room.
Yep.
How important would you say it is to understand what that borrowing capacity is before you go to auction so that you're empowered with that knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely. Super important. So you want to have clarity around what is your absolute maximum, and obviously working backwards from there.
Yeah.
And generally what we do with our clients is we look at, well, what is your maximum? And in some cases we get pre-approved for the maximum, but in some cases we don't want to go that far, and our client may not want to go that high, so we might actually get pre-approved for lower than their maximum. So you just need to be mindful of these things going into the auction. And we also have in some cases that we have clients that aren't pre-approved going to an auction. It does happen. We have had the phone ring a few times and someone's called us and told us they've been successful at auction and we don't have finance organised yet or pre-approved. So in those cases as well, we tend to do as much due diligence as we can from a finance perspective before the auction to get a really, really good understanding of their borrowing capacity so that they can still have some confidence going to the auction even if they aren't pre-approved.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So outside of getting your pre-approval and understanding your borrowing capacity, what other things do you need to know to be prepared for before an auction?
Yeah, so there's a couple of other things. Obviously finance, super important. You also need to make sure you've got your deposit ready. So that's obviously part of that finance component, but understanding what deposit you will need and making sure it's ready. Also, when you're looking at the property itself, the property that you want to buy, with an auction, like Marissa said earlier, like if you are successful at auction, that means you bought the property. There's no subject to this or subject to that. If you're successful at auction, it's yours, whether you like it or not. So if you wanted to get a building inspection done, you need to do that before the auction. So that's another thing that you can do in the lead up. And we recommend this, speak to the agent in the lead up to the auction, and we've got some really good building inspectors that we can recommend. So that could be another thing that you want to do as part of your due diligence.
Yeah, so many good points. I mean, I'll just add to that in terms of the building inspection. Sometimes you also want to throw in a pest inspection.
Yep.
Like James said, there's no second chances once you bid at an auction. So
Yep.
if you want to confirm that you're comfortable with all of these things, you actually need to do these inspections before you even know that you're going to be successful buying this property with a property going for auction.
Yep.
In regards to the deposit, like James said, it's super important to have your deposit ready. So your friendly Rise High mortgage broker will be able to tell you how much deposit you will need to pay at the auction or after the auction, and you need to make sure you've got that cash ready and available to go. If that's not going to be possible, there are options that you can consider that we can help you with. Things like a deposit guarantee is something that we could look at, which means that you don't actually physically have to pay the cash deposit. There are other things that the vendor will accept at that point. But these are all things we can go through with you to help you prepare for auction.
Yeah.
I guess the other point is to make sure that the property that you're actually wanting to buy is going to be a suitable security for the loan. So you want to sort of avoid things like, you know, things that are close to main roads, high voltage power, things that are in very dense apartment living. If your property covers any of these categories or is a bit more of a high risk property, you might want to talk about this with your broker before you actually bid at the auction.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and that's part of what we do for all of our clients as well, is a bit of a sanity check on the property before you go to auction. So, you know, we bring up Google Maps and sort of see where it fits within the neighbourhood and what are the neighbouring properties, and where are those main roads? Are there any commercial properties nearby? Any high voltage power lines? Things that could be a problem for the bank.
Yes.
So we can tend to, using Google Maps, have a good feel for whether the property's in a good location or a low risk location from a bank's perspective, or whether it might be more of a high risk. Yeah, so it's good to know before you go into the auction.
We also have access to some really great data that would be able to give you a property valuation report before you actually go to auction, so that you know what the property is roughly worth, and a really good data around other properties in the area that have sold recently, so that you actually go in with some really good knowledge around what the property value should be and where it should land.
Yep.
So that pretty much will get you prepared for auction.
Yep, that's in the lead up.
That's the lead up.
Yep.
So now you've done all your due diligence, you've got your finance approval, you've found the dream property, you've done your inspections, they've all come out good.
Yep.
Let's talk about the bidding process. What do you need to do if you want to bid at an auction?
Yep, so what you need to do is obviously open up some communication lines with the agent in the lead up again to the auction, and you'll need to discuss with the agent about registering as a bidder.
Yes, very important.
Yep, so you need to register before, you can't just go to an auction, start putting your hand up, you need to register. But
how much in advance do you need to register?
Generally it's on the day.
Yes.
Yep.
You can register earlier though, in some instances.
So what I'd suggest, if you're looking at going to auction, you don't want your first conversation with that agent to be on the day. Yes. You want to start that conversation with them as early as possible, like a week before the auction ideally, or even longer. But when you register, there'll be a couple of things that the agent will want to discuss with you. So one of them will be deposit. So generally, like, the rule is that if you're buying at auction, there'll be a 10% deposit payable if you're successful. But you can negotiate a lower deposit in some circumstances. It might be 5%, for example. So that's something you need to agree upon when you register.
Yes.
And another thing that's really important is also the settlement date.
Yes.
So you can agree upon that when you register, so before the auction. Depending on where you are, like if you're pre-approved, then we can be a bit more aggressive and we could be looking at a 30-day settlement. If it's, depending, like you might want to be pushing for a longer settlement, but again, like, that's part of that negotiation with the agent.
So it is quite possible that all of the bidders that are registered for the auction might have different conditions agreed upon.
Correct.
Based on what their negotiations with the agent have been.
Yep.
So what are some of the tips that you give to clients on how to be successful when bidding in an auction? It's a pretty daunting and overwhelming process for someone that hasn't bid at an auction before.
Yep.
What advice do you generally give clients to help them to be successful in that scenario?
Yeah, there's no one size fits all, unfortunately. So it is a tricky one. I've had some funny ones. I've had some clients that have got a group of friends together and they've gone to the auction together, and they've just been really loud and basically saying that to each other really loudly that I don't care how much this thing goes for, I'm going to get it, I'm going to outbid anyone, I'm going to pay top dollar, and trying to say it in such a way that everyone around them can hear them.
Bidders. Has that worked for them?
That worked on that occasion. I've had other clients that have sort of gone in and just sort of wanted to wait till the end and then just come in with a final bid. So it really depends on who's there on the day, who else is bidding, depends on how the agent sort of runs the auction. So there's quite a few variables that come into play. One thing that we do always recommend is really important, before you go to the auction, you want to know what your maximum is.
Absolutely.
So you want to know, based on your research, your comfort level, the particular property that you're looking at, you want to make sure that okay, I'm willing to pay up to $700,000 for this.
Yeah, because it's easy to get caught up in the emotion of the day, isn't it? And just to get a bit carried away.
Correct.
So it's really important to, and I guess the other side of that is not to be, just understanding that different bidders have different strategies,
Yep.
and not to let other bidders, lower your confidence,
Yep.
or, get in the way of you putting forward what you are willing to pay for the property.
Yeah. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the silver bullet for that question, but
I guess the other thing to note is that if you are feeling really nervous about bidding on the property and it is a property that you really want, you can employ the services of a buyer's agent who's really experienced at bidding on the property, and they can bid on your behalf. Or you can ask a family or friend
Yep.
who is confident in that setting to actually bid on your behalf. So you don't actually have to be the one bidding at the auction if you don't feel comfortable doing that.
yeah.
So let's say you go to the auction, you bid, you're successful, you pop the champagne. What do you do next?
So you drink the champagne.
Yeah.
So that's the most important thing.
Yes.
But then after that, you've got a few bits of business that you need to tidy up. So I think from a finance perspective, once you're successful in the auction, you'll then go in and sign the purchase contract. So that's the first thing. So you want to get a copy of your purchase contract and send it straight through to Rise High, straight through to your broker, so that we can keep the wheels in motion around finance. But deposit will be due as well. Generally, you would obviously need to discuss that with the agent, but they'll generally say that you can pay the deposit on the Monday, and that would normally be an electronic transfer into the agent's trust account.
And that's if the auction's on the weekend, but if the auction's on a weekday, they may want the deposit paid that day. So you need to be prepared for that.
Yep. Yeah, so purchase contract, deposit, payment, building insurance is another important one.
Yes, super important. I mean, I guess that from the moment that you bid and you're successful at bidding at auction, you physically are responsible for the building insurance, aren't you?
Correct.
So you should be having a conversation with the insurance company within 1 hour of buying the property to make sure insurance is over the property.
Yeah, that's right. And you can generally get free cover up until settlement if you're talking to the right insurer.
And that's something that we can help point you in the right direction of to get you that insurance in place.
Yep, definitely. So purchase contract, deposit, building insurance, and conveyancer would be the next thing. So you can probably let the dust settle a little bit, wait until the champagne's finished, maybe a couple of days, but you do need to get a conveyancer on board that will be your legal representative to help with the purchase of the property. And we generally work really closely in the back end with the conveyancers to make sure everything's done smoothly, and you generally don't need to get too involved in that process, but you do need to make sure you've appointed your conveyancer.
Yeah, and if you don't know any conveyancers, we can recommend some really great ones to help you out in that process.
Yep, absolutely.
So that's it. You've prepared yourself, you've gone to the auction, you've been successful. Let's talk about some of the risks of an auction, because of course there are some risks. What are some of the risks that you see happen, James?
Yeah, so generally what we see, the most common risk that people face going into an auction is that, yes, you're pre-approved. So what that means is the bank's done their assessment on your income, your employment, your credit history, all of that sort of thing, and they're happy that you can afford the loan that you want to apply for. So that's all good. But the other thing that hasn't been looked at as part of that pre-approval is the actual property itself. So one of the risks under an auction condition is that the bank will still need to do a valuation of that property once you've purchased it.
Yes.
So that's why we do that sort of due diligence at the start and look at the property and make sure that it's not close to main roads, etc., so that we get a good feel for it. But there will be a point that the bank will need a valuation, and then we need that valuation to come back positively.
Yes, and we need it to come back at the same value that you paid for it at the auction.
Yeah.
It is pretty unusual that a valuation wouldn't come in at the same purchase price that you've paid for it at auction, because auction is pure market conditions.
Yeah.
But there is a risk, like James said, and sometimes the risk isn't so much about the value that's going to come back, but some risks that the valuer identifies that would make the bank uncomfortable in using that particular property as security.
Yeah. So I think, like, just to recap again on those things from a risk from a valuation perspective, that's probably the location of the property. So if you're generally in suburbia, like in the middle of a suburb, it's pretty low risk.
Yes.
You know, if you're on a main road or close to a big intersection, then there's a little bit of extra, consideration required. So that's one thing, just like the location and where the property sits. But then the property itself, is it in good condition? Are there some major cracks or problems with the property that could be problematic for the valuation? So it's really sort of looking at that side of things as well. But it's important, like we talked about at the start, it's important that you look at all those things and consider those things up front, so that by the time it gets to valuation, we're very confident that everything's going to be fine.
Now, one thing that you can probably do to protect yourself against that risk is potentially negotiate a longer settlement date.
Yeah.
Because that just gives us the ability to, if one valuer has some issues with the property, we can potentially go to another lender and get the property valued by another lender, and they might have a different take on the risk associated with the property. So having a bit of extra time in your settlement process just gives a little bit of flexibility to manage those problems if they do come up, which are quite rare, but it's a risk. Are there any other risks that people need to be aware of in terms of bidding at auction?
I suppose from a finance perspective, it's just, ensuring that you haven't had any major changes to your financial circumstances since you got the pre-approval.
Yes, that's a really
changing jobs or things like that, or taking on some major new liabilities, like go and get a car loan, for example.
Or had another baby.
So they're all things, like you want to make sure that from when you got the pre-approval, that from a financial position's the same when you're at the auction.
Yes.
And there hasn't been any major changes.
Yeah, and I think just keeping in really regular contact with your broker will be a great way to make sure that you feel really confident, really comfortable going into the auction, and you give it your best shot.
Yep.
So that's it, you're prepared.
That's it.
Now you're ready to go to auction, and we're here right behind you, supporting you every step of the way. Anytime you need us, you can call us, even when you're standing at the auction if you need some help. We are your team, and we're here to support you in your buying process. So please reach out to the team at Rise High, and we can't wait to help you buy your next home. Thanks, and have a great day. Bye.